such a great opportunity for folk to come together in a setting where there's so many subjects that we need to cover, that need to be addressed, but also because what I find really interesting and really powerful about it is that we've got a combination of people who are from kind of community, grassroots levels, and then hopefully we'll have policymakers and stakeholders. So we really need to have that conversation because I feel like there's a gap that needs to be addressed. And I know things can't change overnight, obviously, but it's a start, you know, and I think if we work together and continue working together, there's a lot that we can achieve and make a huge difference.
Someone once told me, if power is shared, it ceases to exist. If power is shared, it ceases to exist. Well, I don't know if that's true, but if it is, then this is what we're gathered for today is a truly daring plan.
What underpins all of this for me is unequal power relations, and that then speaks to the question of resource. So whether that's money, financial access to money, and then how that translates into access to time. Part of where this whole concept, from my perspective, came from was an anti-sectarian programme where we were working with communities, and it ended up being over 6 years. But year on year, we didn't know that. So every single year, we were back to square one in terms of justifying what we were doing, who we were going to be working with, applying for the money. I started this role in 2019, just in November. And the first thing I was asked to do was really just speak to people about what support they felt they needed for community engagement within their role. So mostly researchers at Glasgow Uni and at GCPH. It was really clear. We feel that community engagement is something far more than we know it to be or understand. We want to be doing things that are more meaningful, but are not necessarily sure how to, or don't have the time or resource to do it properly. What I was trying to do was both design training in a way that was responsive to what people were saying, but also go a step further than that and co-produce the materials for doing the training with community organisations, so that whatever I was delivering within the university wasn't just my perspective on things, but was a collective of voices. But I think what we felt was maybe missing, and what a lot of people felt was missing, was documentation of the processes and unfinished, messy processes, all of that learning of what's difficult and what can we learn out of the difficulty and what's not gone well, but also a platform for the voices that aren't often heard even within the institutions.
To listen, reflect, and learn is not easy or comfortable. But if we're daring enough, maybe we might just hear this music playing, asking questions, asking us to open up, to discuss. Maybe we might hear this music playing. We might just hear this poetry of valuing people, of resourcing people for their involvement, of what is required for all this to happen. And if we're daring enough, we might just find ourselves reminding ourselves about the neighborhood.
I'm a PhD student in a research at the uni, so just coming towards the end of my PhD, towards the end of 4 years. And before that, I worked in community development for about 12 years full time, and previous to that I'd been a volunteer in lots of different community projects.
So with WESREC, the West of Scotland Regional Equality Council, I work as a development officer for a project called Roots Scotland, which aims to engage minority ethnic communities with the heritage sector. I also work with the Scottish Refugee Council as well, as a regional coordinator for the southwest of Scotland.
I've got lots of experience of working with refugees and asylum seekers. I work for a mental health charity, so I've got mental health experience. My background is in community development, so I have a lot of experience in facilitation and really drawing out conversations and subjects and areas and drawing out ideas. So I think that's what I have to bring to the table. I'm also an activist and a campaigner.
My role is to sort of facilitate relationships between grassroots community groups, more larger third sector organisations, and those within general sphere, so public sector organisations.
The easiest thing to do is talk about my biggest influence in my work, which is a Brazilian theatre director called Augusto Boal, and his work with the theatre of the oppressed. That work is inherently political in that it looks, with a small p, in that it is using drama to explore, to visualize how oppression and injustice works, and how we support that in our everyday life through everyday rituals and things that we do, how those structures are, supported. What I like about theatre of the oppressed is like the different meanings of the word act. So there's the sense that we're all acting roles in our life, and I think that's a really useful thing to start to think about, depending on your gender, your skin color, your age.
So in terms of what I'm going to bring, I will be kind of facilitating, some of the discussions, but also one of the main things I'll be doing is having a conversation with a friend of mine and also a colleague, Jan. She's got lived experience of being a refugee and so on, but she took part in a project that I was running about being a peer researcher.
I am going to probably do some games, some warm-up games with everybody. So the idea of like being active and active in it with your whole self and active in a slightly different way.
I personally feel as if this will be a good opportunity to see how this form of working develops with regards to community engagement in terms of community group members being involved alongside academics, representatives from the public sector, other representatives from the third sector. So really just very interested to see how things go along and how we can all work together.
This is about different languages, people using the same word but saying different things, push people with push words, push barriers to language. If we're daring enough, maybe we might just hear this poetry reminding us that people don't feel welcome, that we need better research, that policymakers need to listen for improvement of human health.
It's, of course, fantastic to involve people who have direct experience of issues, but how about at every level rather than just at the point of telling your story, which it has value and, of course, is valuable in and of itself, and people should be able to tell their story when that's useful for them. But I've certainly worked with individuals, and myself personally have felt you're telling your story to what end? Because is somebody just going to listen again and again?
I think for me, I don't know, Jan, if you agree with this, but for me, it's really about obviously listening to the stories, listening to people's experiences, and then it's about the participants saying, okay, we know it works. What can I do in my power? What resources do I have to take this work forward?
What I would want to get out is not for people to hear the story as stories, but to hear the stories as learning and something that can be changed. There's no point listening. For example, if I tell you my story and you hear it as a story, then you've missed out on a lot of things that I told you, because you are listening in a perspective of, I'm a storyteller, I'm sharing something important, which has value, meaning, and you have the power to change where you are. You have the power to change other people's experiences.
I've seen change happen. I've seen, I was part of a campaign where one of my school friends was downrated and detained, and she was about to be deported, and we were school kids at that time. So I was 15 and so was she. We formed a campaign within the school, and then the community came together and really challenged the Home Office. And for me, it showcased the power of community, the power of humanity, the power of understanding that doesn't matter where we come from, our backgrounds, we can all come together and create positive change.
What working in communities really helps us to do, and I think is one of the most, innovative, exciting things about working with people in communities using community development approaches, is that we actually start to understand those entanglements and those overlaps about the inequalities and social injustices that people are experiencing, rather than thinking about things in silos and boxes.
And I think not with all academics, but I think there is a general thing in academia of not really understanding what proper long-term community engagement means, or, to be fair to a lot of academics, not having the time and resources to be able to do that work. So I think there's all of this kind of stuff is in there and needs to be teased out and thought about, and there's got to be a way of trying to merge those two so that everybody's needs are the same, or at least it's fulfilling those different needs at the same time.
So many people have the solutions to so many problems. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's just so many ideas going around and everything like that, but there's no platform for people to be heard, to be listened to, and to have that discussion. We all have different backgrounds, we all have different resources, knowledge, and so on. But if we come together and really utilize that, we can create so much change, not just for us in Glasgow or Scotland, but to inspire the rest of the world,
So I think what was interesting about your perspective then is, like, because you came to this type of event the other way. You were one of the participants in the breakout room before, right? Like, how do you think, how does that change how you see it, or how does that excite you about now wearing the other hat, if you see what I mean?
One of the things that's always in the forefront of your minds when you're thinking about collaboration or doing anything with other people is power, and how power shifts and what power looks like in different contexts and situations. And I think that's one of the things that I've really had a big insight into from my role in communities and now working in academia. So even though I was quite a senior member of staff in the third sector organisation I worked with before, I was very awed by the academics that we worked with in the collaborative research project.
From my own experience of working across sectors in the same room, it's not always the easiest scenario, and community members, community representatives can often be intimidated by the likes of academics being in the same conversation. So it's just a matter of getting around those sort of issues, I think, Monique, and seeing how we can improve on that on the day.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and something we absolutely need to focus on, I think, centrally. I certainly, and I know others did as well, often felt that we were placed at sort of a lower pecking order than others in more powerful institutions with academic knowledge, and it kind of just goes up and up and up, but then we were still being paid. So imagine being a community member and how your voice and expertise is valued or not. Because if you can't equally value community expertise and evidence and knowledge that's coming out of that work alongside, these programs that have better funding because they're coming from bigger institutions, because they have academic backing, you're never going to balance that out, unless we come together in some way. But in order to come together in some way, it has to be on some sort of more equal basis than we're currently working on.
Having worked again based in communities, we had some researchers several times come and ask to kind of access our communities to do some pieces of research. So to interview people or do focus groups or to talk to us as staff. And the majority of those occasions where that happened, after they'd collected their data, we never heard from the researchers again about what had happened to the project, where the information had gone.
It shouldn't be just, we attended this workshop and it was interesting. Yeah, it was interesting, but what have you taken? Like, what steps are you going to implement in your own work? And I think the question about what power do you have? Because I feel like after hearing from everyone's experience, you will recognize you do have the power to implement change.
I think it's about accountability, and it's about having something that's sustainable so that, you know, we can make sure that these things are happening. But obviously that all relies, as we know, on funding and resources and time and so on and so forth. But I think if we're really serious about this, is taking that time to say, okay, this is what we can do as policymakers or stakeholders. And then it's about the community and I guess the facilitators, I suppose, or so on, to make sure that we check in with that we don't let it go.
What I'm hearing is that we really want people to think about, what are they learning? What are they learning about the power that they have? What can they do? How can they overcome some barriers? Because I guess if we all want meaningful collaborations, then we've all got some action that we need to try and take. We have all got some kinds of power. That's a question based on what I heard. It seems to be that working towards getting to people to think about a pledge might be helpful, but what do others think?
And so we try to work on this. We co-conspire as we thoughtfully perspire, trying to transform how to work, wishing for some kind of telepathy, a limited telepathy that might just encourage sincerity and that attitude, that effervescent attitude of giving things a go. And so now, if you feel comfortable, please hold your pledge in front of you.
So the main session will be just everybody in it, but there won't be Q&A or anything in the first part. It'll be more observed conversations. Gavin's session about what does power look like, he's going to send people into small breakout rooms to basically think about what unequal power looks like. And then the next two sections are literally just going to be kind of like you would watch a webinar, but just watching Amal, Amanda and Jan having an informal conversation. I think Amal's going to be sort of like interviewing the two of them. I think that's how she wanted to play it. Okay. So we started out with power being a sort of central root and framing the event, and then drilling down into the granular detail with Jan and Amal, then sort of coming back out a little bit into practical examples of how to potentially do things differently. And that's where Amanda sort of sits with the facilitation and an example of having done something very differently. And then we're bringing Claire Binner in, who's our colleague in the School of Education at Glasgow Uni, who's recently published a piece about the types of knowledge needed for good policy making. Okay. And what I really like about her work is that, or this part of her work, is that it looks at 3 different types of knowledges that are needed to come together. But I think what really struck me with her article was that it's all of those that we need. It's not that any one is more important, but if we don't have them all, we can't possibly hope to change things for the better, really. And I think it's a really important message.
And then the final type of knowledge, and I think this is the one that's probably the most relevant to the conversations that we're having here, is practical wisdom or phrenesis. Now, this is the ability to combine different forms of evidence with empathy and with judgments about what action to take in a specific situation. So, for example, really phrenesis, the practical wisdom is to get at the values underneath the judgments that we have to make. So who's being included, who's being excluded? These are the types of issues that we need to have that practical wisdom to understand. There are no perfect solutions and perfect answers, but it's about the ability to deliberate and to weigh up those alternatives.
And then similarly with Claire and Shruti, so my colleague who's looking at racialisation in public health, she's going to talk about dismantling systemic racism.
So I thought I'd begin by just outlining what we mean by the term systems change and why it's so important. I think many of us might have heard the words, but what does it actually mean? A systems approach is usually needed to solve complex problems, but racism, like tackling climate change or alleviating poverty, is a complex problem. It doesn't have clear causes, and the influencing variables can't be easily isolated. So a system can be small like an organization, or it can be massive like society. And racism is a system based on race that unfairly disadvantages some individuals and communities and puts others at advantages. So far, all we've seen is isolated efforts which have delivered small-scale improvements to small parts of the whole problem. So that's a small part of the whole system. But in order to solve the complex problem, we need to see and leverage the entire system. This includes all of the parts and all of the relationships that exist between them. And the relationships, as we know, will change and move over time. So they're dynamic and they keep shifting. So a systems change requires us to shift the foundations that hold those complex problems in place. And it basically seeks to address the root causes of the problems. And that then allows us to work towards a transformational long-term change. So it's not instrumental change we're looking for, it's transformational change, and it's definitely not projects that we're looking to do. So kind of with the current focus on racism, it's not enough to simply improve systems, but we need to transform them. But we also need to, with that focus on racial equality, we need to disrupt those systems.
It's just endless potential, I think, with this. It's definitely freed up the way that we've thought about this event, I think, in terms of how creative we can be. And I think there's just scope for doing more and more and more along those lines.
We have to be careful about not trying to do too much and then not doing it and then not doing anything well. And I just wonder, like, it's going to be amazing, all these people together, and they've seen these amazing presentations and things about knowledge. And I'm just if I've seen that, I'm going to want 15 minutes with two other people just to go blah and hear what they think about it all, you know, and what have I just heard that's new, and I don't know. And then so I think there is just a chance to reflect, and maybe it is to think about power. And then when it's coming into those, I wonder, when we come back to our breakout rooms, we're kind of into the facilitated breakout rooms, you know, the task that everybody has got to do is write something on their bit of paper, and we ask them to think about some of those questions individually, or I don't know. I'm just trying to think about a reflection and then a task of kind of facilitated task might be a way of just splitting that, which is clearer than trying to put all of those questions in.
As Gavin said, like, we've got the break there, but it's only 5 minutes, and there's so much we're trying to fit into all of this. And there's so much that happens in that first session that we want folk to be reflecting on for the second breakout bit. So either we're going to send folk into really small breakout rooms for 10 minutes to reflect, and then come together in their bigger facilitated group to think about two questions. One which is likely about having reflected on all of this power and the power that you have and everything you've heard, what can you bring to a meaningful collaboration? And the second is about what you'll pledge to do differently. And that part is the part that we want to document visually.
Okay, so I'd sent a little bit of a brief around before, and just to clarify, that was just a combination of what we've spoken about already, so that wasn't anything set in stone at all. Then it's really the breakout sessions we wanted to chat about today. So we've got, I think it's 45 minutes. Jenny and I had a quick discussion about logistics. So in terms of just very practically, I'm not sure that we're going to be able to rotate people 4 times.
If you're going to meaningfully go around and hear from everybody in that group, that's going to take a long time. And so I think we shouldn't switch around breakout rooms. I think everybody should just stay in the same breakout room for 40 minutes.
That's so much of the craft of community practitioners and facilitators, and all of this kind of process, really, really granular process detail. You are literally trying to redress that power imbalance at every step that you make. And that looks quite different in different settings, but it is a skill that is honed over years and years and years by many people working with communities, working in community development, working, you know, and community members. It's because it's an interaction, it's a relational thing.
Maybe how do you remove barriers to participation? You know, so reflecting on what you've been thinking about your own power, how do you remove barriers to participation? But the reason is because if the way you'd put it might encourage people only to think about overcoming their own barriers they're facing, whereas this, I think, is making sure that you're not creating barriers.
That was something that we've spoken about so much over the years in terms of really addressing power imbalance and how fundamental facilitation skills are. because it's really a lot of the time in that process that you are either enabling or silencing.
Is there a thought about introducing any time limits when facilitating chats to try and make sure people get an equal chance to speak? Anil, did you have something else you wanted to say on that?
Oh, thanks, Catherine. I mean, it's a tough one. It's a bit of a moral dilemma because obviously the questions are posed to encourage an open conversation. So I don't know whether a time limit would stifle that sort of talk, but I can just find using it in the past has helped quite well, especially when there might be differing levels of confidence or willingness to participate in the chat. So I don't know whether a sort of talking stick method might be worth considering.
Kat, I think you had some suggestions of a simple tool for that. Was it something about speaking cards or something?
It's brutal.
Okay.
The first, you might like this, Gavin. Just not because it's brutal, but just because it's kind of putting things directly up in front of a screen. That it just depends on whether people have got time or we can get them out to people. So the first one is so this is part of a legitimate toolkit, by the way. It's Iris Co-Production Planner. And the reason why I found it necessary to use these tools is that sometimes a kind of hands up can be interpreted in so many different ways, and very dominant people can just think that hands up as a kind of like sign for keep talking, whereas this seems to have more of an effect. And then because people can really embody a kind of wanting to speak very differently.
Amal, I'm just thinking about what you said about sending people stuff ahead of time. Could we send a little bit of a really brief info sheet ahead of time where we outline in the breakout sessions, we want to make sure that everybody has a chance, like we explain that we're going to be doing that on the day, so it's not a surprise to anyone. And we could even ask people, please ahead of time, get an A4 sheet of paper, write stop on one and I want to speak on another. And it's almost a bit more of a light-hearted way of presenting it, I guess. But I guess the other point is what tools we actually use within the breakout rooms to ensure that everybody has a chance to speak. And even more than that, that those who usually don't get a chance to speak have more chance to speak. I think we want to push it even further.
I think, and I hope, that actually some of the people that are usually more comfortable speaking might be a little bit uncomfortable because they often don't like to think of themselves being in powerful positions. So I'm not saying I want people to feel real uncomfortable, but actually they kind of need to. So it's good if they're maybe less vocal because they're maybe feeling a little bit unsure, or they're really reflecting on actually they do hold power and they maybe didn't quite realize, or they actually just don't like to think about it and they don't like to acknowledge it. I don't quite know how we're going to capture those pledges. I mean, we can obviously capture something afterwards, and I think we should think about how we'll try and, I don't like the term evaluation, but essentially how we're going to kind of get feedback and get evaluation on this. But I think it would be really nice to try and capture that on the day as well.
Can I say something?
Sorry, go ahead.
It's just because you were talking about capturing something, and I was on another training. They use this app called Metimeter or something. We logged in, and then it's like a poll, but we can see, like, the whole group got to see what word, people, like, for example, before talking about emotion. So as soon as you typed it in, we can all see it. And I think that would be a great way to catch those pledges, because one, we'll have a record of it, and secondly, we will see what the theme is.
I'm pretty old school when it comes to that sort of delivery. Monique, sessions that I deliver normally just do include me taking notes and then feeding back. I was thinking whether there's the logistics for this and there's the time. Could we potentially pass on key aspects of pledges made to an allocated person who then group them according to themes, which could be fed back at the end of the event?
That's a great idea. And if we're thinking of this as a starting point, we can, as others have said, we can be feeding back to people who came, hopefully carrying on the conversation. So maybe it's a combination of these methods.
There's something nice about old school right? You know, about not having to use, you know, I use it a lot when I run drama workshops. I ask people to have a bit of paper and write like one word big and hold it up to the screen, or two words and hold it up to the screen. And wouldn't it be amazing when we all come back with 100 and whatever many people all holding something up to the screen that we can, I mean, I think that would just be visually so nice and be able to find it. And I don't know, I get a little bit, I do like Jamboard and things, but there's something quite accessible if you're just asking people to have a bit of paper and a pen and write a word. You know, that's all we're asking.
And then coming back together for the reflections, I think what we're going to do for that bit is cut that time down a little bit, and the pledges will be that holding up the placards together, probably screenshotting that, making that available, possibly on a Padlet for everybody to access afterwards and continue the conversation. Plus, we're having future events. This isn't a one-off. And hopefully the final piece of this puzzle, should it come off, which was Amal's idea, is this poet, Tawana. What he does is observe things and then kind of just give a reflection at the end.
The air trembles with the hum of buzzwords. To listen, reflect, and learn is not easy or comfortable. But if we're daring enough, maybe we might hear this poetry saying trust, reciprocity, dignity, balance, power balance. The air trembles with the hum of buzzwords. To listen, reflect, and learn is not easy or comfortable, but if we're daring enough, maybe we might just hear this poetry saying, there is power in balance.